Moonlight pooled beneath Brighton's ancient eaves as mourners pressed close to the funeral home's weathered floorboards. They heard it first as a low, desperate wail seeping through cracks between polished planks. They waited in trembling silence until a stray hound bolted free. Its frantic cries rattled shutters and turned blood cold. Names once spoken in hushed reverence became curses on bright street corners. No one dared pry open those boards. No one wanted to know what stirred below. Rumors spread like wildfire through midnight taverns. Some swore they glimpsed pale fingers scraping against dark beams. Others claimed a shape slithered into alley shadows. Brighton's reputation cracked in that howl. A cold breath rose from the planks. Each hour more names were etched into memory. Each hour the question burned hotter. What malevolent force held Brighton in its grip? Now the past bleeds into the present. Now the boundary between life and death grows thin, and dread deepened around every silent dark corner. Tonight you will follow footprints into blackened basements. Tonight you will listen for voices that echo where none should live. Tonight you will learn what crawled free from under those coffins, and why it never stops calling. What do you think lurks beneath those coffin boards? Two brothers came home from the Boer War under a cloud of triumph and trauma. Two Brighton brothers returned from distant battlefields, their eyes haunted by the memories of gunfire and loss. They sought comfort in drink, in the roar of liquor sloshing against glass, in the chaos of crowded taverns. And then one night, rage flared like a torch in dry wood. In a drunken brawl, one brother swung a fist that sent the other crashing against cold cobblestones. The air filled with the sick copper smell of blood and sweat. He lay barely alive, gasping for breath under the dull glow of lantern lights. Hate. Their father, a hulking figure carved from stone and regret, knelt by his fallen son and swore vengeance. His voice trembled with fury and fear. The Brighton name fractured in that moment. Neighbors watched from darkened windows as the clan split in two. Friends turned their backs. Families chose sides. The mild breeze carried muffled arguments through narrow streets. Windows shook with every shout. Doors slammed like gunshots. No one dared step between them. The next morning, dawn revealed fresh footprints leading from one broken home to another. The air smelled of damp earth and spent gunpowder. Houses lay silent as if holding their breath. Whispered rumors wound through the town like creeping ivy. Some said the wounded brother had cursed his family with his dying words. Others claimed the father had raised a rifle to avenge his child. Questions rippled across Brighton's sloping roofs. How did a single blow become a vendetta? How did anger find its way into every hearth and field? The answers hovered in the grey morning mist, refusing to clear. The feud fed on itself, growing darker with each whispered accusation. Weeks passed and Brighton transformed into two halves of a broken coin. On one side stood the father and his loyal kin, bearing the black ribbon of mourning and wrath. On the other stood the surviving son, wounded in body but alive with vengeance in his heart. Markets once filled with cheerful banter grew tense and uneasy. Merchants bowed their heads when villagers spoke the Brighton name. Horses stamped impatiently in muddy yards, sensing the charge of hostility that pulsed through the town. Children played under watchful eyes, their laughter a fragile attempt to deny the gathering storm. Even the church bells tolling for Sunday services rang with a hollow echo, as if they too recoiled from the bitterness in the air. Night after night, a lone lantern bobbed along the winding road outside town. A figure stalked the edges of frost-kissed fields, hunting for a chance to settle the debt of blood. The moon glinted off the barrel of a rifle held close to the hunter's chest. Every breath formed a small cloud in the cold air. Every footstep crackled through brittle grass. Somewhere a dog howled, mourning a world gone mad. And in the hush that followed, Brighton dreamed of peace it would never see. The feud whispered through empty barns and shuttered cottages. It seeped into the soil where crops should have grown. It stained waterways that once sparkled under midday sun. The land itself seemed to mourn a family torn apart. Then came the first killing. A Brighton cousin drawn into the crossfire of spite, slipped into the night and never returned. A bloodstain bloomed on the flagstones of his home. No explanation followed his disappearance. No verdict closed the case. The town held its breath. Eyes darted in every shadow. Even the wind seemed to pause before rustling the leaves. A sense of dread settled over Brighton like a shroud. The feud had leapt from fists to blades. It had grown teeth and claws. It had become a living thing that hunted its prey without mercy. No one could say where it would strike next. As fear took hold, loyalties shattered. Neighbors who once shared bread now eyed each other with suspicion. Gates creaked on rusted hinges, welcoming danger instead of friends. Midnight meetings in hidden barns plotted retaliation. A single spark could ignite a massacre, and soon it did. On a moonless night, torches flared along Brighton's main street. A mob formed, faces masked by anger and half-crazed resolve. They carried pitchforks and rifles stolen from shuttered homes. They moved like a single organism, driven by a hunger for blood. The house on the hill, where the surviving brother had holed up, became the target. Its windows burned with candlelight. Doors stood barred but not unbreakable. A cry rang out, a wail of defiance and despair. Then the first shot split the night. Timber splintered, bricks fell, screams answered gunfire. In the chaos, figures darted in and out of broken windows, dropping like marionettes cut from their strings. Shadows danced against splintered walls. The mob pressed forward, unstoppable in its thirst for vengeance. They tore the house apart, room by room. They hunted every hiding place. They answered suffering with suffering. When the dawn broke, the house lay in ruins. Silence claimed the streets. No birdsong greeted the sun. No footsteps echoed across the stones. Brighton had become a graveyard for the living. Only smoke curled from the remnants of the house on the hill. Only the scent of death lingered in the crisp morning air. The father, his vengeance at last fulfilled, stood among the ruins. His eyes, once hard as flint, now brimmed with tears. He had traded his son's life for retribution and found only emptiness. His heart lay shattered beside the broken shutters. The surviving brother lay dead on the threshold, his promise of deliverance extinguished in a pool of blood. In the days that followed, the bodies were buried in unmarked graves. The town dared not speak the names of the dead. The Brighton house remained a hollow shell. Ivy crept across its scorched timbers. Rats carried scraps of cloth away in their tiny jaws. The wind sighed through broken windows, a low lament for a family undone. Brighton's residents drifted back to their homes, shadows in their own lives. They whispered of curses and ghosts. They blamed demons or the devil himself, but the true evil had come from within. It had been born in men's hearts and fanned by rage. It had thrived on betrayal and fear. It had left Brighton forever stained by the blood feud it had ignited. As the seasons turned, grass grew over the unmarked graves. Flowers bloomed in wild profusion, mocking the sorrow they sprang from. Rain washed the streets clean of dust, but not of memory. Every tile, every brick, every broken window held the echo of gunfire. Every breeze carried the cries of a family torn apart. The feud forged in blood had become Brighton's darkest legacy. It whispered on the wind. It seeped into every traveller's dream. It waited in the quiet moments before sleep, and it asked the question that would never fade. How does a single act of violence unleash a tide of slaughter that no one can stop? What do you think fueled this deadly feud? If you're brave, subscribe and share with a friend. Dark velvet drapes swallowed the corners of the Brighton funeral home, their heavy folds pressing against the walls like silent sentinels. The carpet beneath your feet yielded without a sound, as though the floor itself was waiting to catch your breath. Candlelight danced along polished mahogany coffins, sending reflections that curved across the room in slow, mocking smiles. The undertaker, Mr. Brighton, stood at the far end of the parlour, his silhouette framed by the flicker of a single lamp. His smile was gentle, measured, but carried the weight of unspoken promises. He welcomed each client as though they were old friends, guiding them past the glass display cases where ivory-handled mortuary tools lay arranged like ritual instruments. Soft music drifted on the air. An organ hymn played at a tempo too slow, each note lingering like a question. No one spoke above a whisper here. Even silence had been taught to lower its voice. Families arrived in black carriages, mantles of sorrow draped over their shoulders. They entered hoping for dignity and found only a stage. Complaints of vanished loved ones began in hushed tones, voices trembling over cups of stale tea. First, Mrs. Hargrove's husband failed to emerge from the embalming room. Then Mr. Albright's daughter, a pale girl in a white dress, was never laid to rest in her chosen plot. Grieving relatives pressed pleading hands against the polished wood of empty coffins, but saw only an echo of absence. They left their payments on the ledger, their tears on the velvet cushions, and their questions floating through the air like restless spirits. Behind those black curtains, the Brighton family practiced secrets older than the town itself. Late at night, the hidden door to the basement opened with a hiss, revealing walls lined with jars of preserving fluid and shelves bowed under the weight of leather-bound tomes. Incense burned in iron censers, its acrid scent mingling with the copper odor of dried blood. A low chant echoed through narrow passages, words drawn from languages that no living tongue could claim. The undertaker's wife, her eyes rimmed with fevered devotion, traced sigils into the dust with a trembling fingertip. Her voice was a tremor against the stones, reciting promises of resurrection and release for the Brighton souls who came before. Rumours spread that the Brightons had struck a bargain with forces unseen. Children who disappeared in the town's orphanage were said to arrive at the funeral home days later, pale, silent, their small bodies draped in shrouds that carried the Brighton seal. No one admitted to seeing the transfers, no one asked for explanations. Fear smothered their tongues. The mayor's wife wrote frantic letters imploring the council to investigate, but they found only locked rooms and unanswered doorbells. Even the church doors closed on those who sought sanctuary from the funeral home's shadows. One stormy night, a rain-soaked detective arrived, his notebook swollen with testimonies and maps of underground tunnels. He discovered trapdoors, bennies, at the chapel floor and discovered an ossuary where empty shells of coffins were stacked against damp stone walls. He found scraps of velvet embroidered with children's names. He found tally marks carved into the beams, one for each life claimed. He found, above all, silence. The walls listened to his questions and offered only dripping echoes. The funeral home stood above him like a living mausoleum, its heartbeat the distant drip of fluid into steel vats. He fled at dawn, his pen abandoned and his spirit broken. Today, the drapes still hang heavy in the windows. The carpets still absorb the tread of the curious and the desperate. The urns filled with ashes rest on pedestals that gleam under oil lamps. Yet every evening, as the sun dips behind the horizon, a single curtain moves as if drawn by an unseen hand, and a child's soft sob drifts down the corridor, or a rattling coffin lid taps out a hollow lullaby. The undertaker's voice, practiced and calm, whispers through the keyhole, promising comfort and closure. But the cost has already been extracted in full. The bodies never made it into the ground. Their absence is the final proof. What secret rituals hide behind those heavy curtains, and whose souls still call this place home? Will you dare to step inside and lift the veil? They came for comfort under the soft glow of oil lamps. Mrs. Halford stepped into the Brighton parlour, her black veil drawn tight, her grief as raw as fresh linen. She trusted the sisters to ease her sorrow. At dawn, her mourning dress still hung on a carved mahogany chair. She did not. One widow, two more, 3, 4 vanished into the night. Each disappearance whispered of darker design. Their gowns remained as ghosts. The sisters moved in silence among the draped curtains and polished caskets. They spoke in hushed tones of peace and eternal rest, their lips curved in patient sympathy. The ritual began with gentle touch and ended with empty halls. In the quiet hours, the funeral parlour became a trap. Candles flickered, casting long fingers of shadow across. Floors polished by countless tears, heavy velvet drapes stirred though no breeze passed through shuttered windows. The faint scent of lilies turned sour, as if the flowers themselves recoiled in horror. Families arrived, heads bowed, hands clasped tight. They followed the sisters down narrow corridors lined with silver trays and porcelain urns. Voices dropped to whispers. Even the mourners' breaths seemed shameful in that sanctum of sorrow. Mrs. Farnsworth walked those corridors trembling. She sought assurance in the trembling flame of a single lamp. The sister's hand rested on her shoulder. Her voice was soft. She promised the husband's remains would rest in consecrated ground. The next morning, only her purse lay on the marble side table. They found no bodies. No footprints led away. Only empty coffins and locked doors with keys still in the sisters' pockets. The townspeople whispered of secret passages under the chapel floor. They spoke of hinges that opened without sound. They spoke of footsteps that died at the threshold. Mrs. Langley's husband died of sudden fever. She arrived to pay her respects. She nodded at the ledger, watched the undertaker record her name. A veil lowered over her face. When the sun rose, her chair sat empty. The ledger still bore her signature. 1 widow, 2, 3, 4, 5, gone without a trace. The sisters exchanged glances behind their veils. They moved with rehearsed grace, as though each disappearance served a purpose beyond mercy. In the night, a soft chant drifted through the parlor. Local children heard it as they dared peek through curtained windows. The words they could not understand. Their fathers heard it as a ringing laughter in the vaults below. They turned to flee, but never spoke of what they saw. Grieving relatives pressed their ears to locked doors and heard nothing but the steady drip of water in hidden chambers. They knocked, called out names. The only answer was a distant echo of their own anguish. The sisters continued their ministrations, each act a silent severing of life's final bond. A letter arrived from a neighboring county. It bore no return address. Inside, a scrap of black silk and a single line. Completed. The townsfolk knew at once whose hand had written it. They trembled as they read the word. They buried the letter in the churchyard, but it rose again like a curse. Each morning, the silk strip lay atop the chapel steps. An undertaker from the city came to investigate. He carried tools of disclosure, bright lanterns, brass keys, instruments to pry secrets from stone. He met the sisters in the parlor. His lamp revealed no hidden locks. His keys fit no doors. He stared at the sisters' calm faces and felt dread coil around his spine. He asked them directly. They answered with bowed heads and silent sympathy. He left in the night, never to be seen again. A final widow, Mrs. Carrington, arrived clutching a locket of her husband's hair. She wept into a pressed linen handkerchief. The sister took the locket, kissed the tears away. "He'll sleep in peace," she whispered. Mrs. Carrington did not sleep again. At dawn, her weeping ceased. Her footsteps never crossed the threshold. The ledger recorded 6 widows served, 6 signatures in fading ink, 6 graves in the churchyard left undug, 6 hearts broken beyond repair. The sisters marked each departure with quiet precision. No flourish, no sorrow, only the faint click of a pen on parchment. In the weeks that followed, the funeral parlor stood empty. The sisters departed as they had arrived, without word, without luggage, without farewell. Townspeople found only 6 empty mourning gowns, each embroidered with a widow's initials. They burned the gowns in the churchyard, hoping to cleanse the stain. The smoke curled into the sky, but the scent lingered in every home. Today, the Brighton sisters' name is spoken only in warning. Their parlor stands abandoned, its windows boarded, its doors padlocked. Yet at midnight, some say, the drapes still sway. A candle flickers in the dusty window. A soft voice hums a hymn of farewell. Those brave enough to listen swear they hear a creaking chair and the rustle of silk. What deadly comfort did those women find in the funeral parlor? Whose hands filed the final death certificates? The answers lie behind locked doors and shattered veils. They wait in silence for the next mourner to step inside. If you're brave enough to uncover the truth, leave your theory below. A hush fell over the Brighton estate as the grandfather clock struck the witching hour. In the grand parlor, moonlight spilled across velvet drapes and polished oak floors. Shadows danced between portrait frames, their gilded edges catching slivers of pale light. The air smelled of old leather and spiced brandy, with a faint tang of something coppery beneath. Local gossip spoke of a midnight gathering in that room, Brighton elders summoned like pieces on a grim chessboard. They arrived in silence, each footstep muffled by thick carpets, each breath swallowed by the weight of expectation. No candles burned, only the thin beam of a single lantern hovered over a sealed envelope at the center of a heavy mahogany table. Around it, the elders formed a circle, their faces etched with lines of decades and secrets. Their robes whispered as they shifted, the fabric brushing like distant wings. At the edge of the ring, a hooded figure stood apart, shoulders stiff, hands clasped beneath the cowl. No one knew that stranger's name, yet all bowed as the figure stepped forward. A slow wind rattled the window panes, as if the night itself leaned closer to listen. The sealed envelope changed hands with deliberate care. It passed from wizened hand to gnarled hand, each elder tracing the edge as though reading invisible runes. A soft murmur, barely more than a breath, swelled into a low chant. The hooded figure joined in, voice hollow, rising above the others, an echo from some darker place. By the time the slashes began, no one doubted which twin had passed through each house. A family woke to find father's throat cut in a perfect arc. A mother collapsed over her child's crib, crimson fingertips marking her lips. The compassionate twin discovered those bodies on his nightly rounds. He wept beside each victim. He pressed his lantern to trembling hands and vowed to find the evil that wore his brother's face. But the other twin remained unseen. His shape slipped through locked windows and barred doors. He left only the echo of steel on bone and a hushed question. Why would blood flow from a monster born of the same womb as a saint? Neighbors swore they heard the twins speak in the dead hours. One voice begged for forgiveness. The other laughed like broken glass. Servants trembled at the manor gates, refusing to tend its halls after dusk. They share a face, they said, but not a soul. One walks with God, the other walks with something older. Posters went up along dusty roads. "Have you seen the Twins of Terror?" they read, offering coin for any hint. But the family name carried power, and fear kept lips sealed. Only when bodies started surfacing on Brighton land did the town council demand answers. A deputation arrived under a steel sky. Lanterns bobbed across the courtyard's uneven stones. The compassionate twin greeted them at the threshold, robes clean, eyes haunted. He spoke in measured tones about the madness that had taken his brother. He spoke of a curse whispered through generations, of ancestral sins buried beneath the manor's foundations. He offered to lead them to hidden archives, to prove his innocence and expose the twisted heart that beat beside his own. The councilmen followed, uncertain if they were shepherds or sheep led to slaughter. In the dusty archives they found journals bound in cracked leather. Pages bore two scripts, one neat and soiled, flowing, the other jagged and spattered with ink that turned rust with age. The saintly twin read aloud passages of charity and sacrifice, of nights spent comforting dying strangers. Then he stopped. His voice caught on a line he could not finish. He showed the council the other entries. Rituals performed beneath a bleached oak, offerings of blood left at crossroads, incantations promising power at the price of flesh. He trembled as he traced the words. No one doubted the hand that wrote them. No one doubted the darkness that had claimed it. Outside, distant thunder promised a storm. The compassionate twin begged the council for mercy on his people. He vowed to exile himself if only to end the terror. But the council had heard the wails that followed the other twin's passage. They saw the shredded remains that marked his path. They feared the nightmare would never end. They condemned the Brighton estate to quarantine. They ordered the saintly twin to stand guard over the walls. They ordered the monster twin to be hunted without mercy. At midnight, lightning tore the sky. A crack like the world splitting in two echoed through the manor. The compassionate twin stood at the eastern gate, heart pounding with dread. A figure approached, tall, gaunt, moving with a predatory grace. The cruel twin had come home. He moved through the storm like a spectre, unspeaking, eyes ablaze with triumph. The saintly twin drew a blade forged for mercy's sake. He met his brother on the threshold beneath torrential rain and thunder's roar. Steel sang against steel. One blow sent the cruel twin sprawling into a puddle of mud and blood. The other rushed forward to offer salvation, but his mercy was met with a savage laugh. The cruel twin lunged again, and the steel found flesh. Morning revealed a scene of horror. The cruel twin lay broken at the gate, face turned to the heavens in a final sneer. The saintly twin knelt in the drenched grass, hands stained with red that was not his own. He knelt in the rain and wept until his tears mingled with the storm. No one dared speak. The manor doors stood open, silent witnesses to a feud forged in blood. The villagers buried both twins in a single grave beside the old oak. They carved two names on one stone, one praising mercy, the other warning of evil. To this day, Brighton Manor stands empty beneath moonlight. Locals say the oak's branches twist toward the house like pleading hands. Travelers on stormy nights swear they hear the clash of steel and the final savage scream that broke the world in two. They say a pair of lanterns float through the courtyard, one bright and warm, the other flickering with wicked flame. No one dares linger beneath the wind-shaken boughs. And though the twins rest beneath the same clay, their spirits roam free, bound by blood, divided by soul. What drives two lives born the same day to diverge into saint and monster? What fate awaits the next pair of twins who walk through Brighton's gates? If you dare to answer, leave your thoughts below. If you crave more forbidden truth, subscribe for the next descent into history's darkest corners. It was just past the stroke of midnight when the Brighton chapel door creaked open to no living soul. The air lay heavy with frost and candle smoke. In the small gallery above the nave, a solitary piano stood beneath a tattered velvet curtain. Every third Sunday, that piano's keys were pressed by a Brighton heir. Their slender fingers found a mournful chord, and the chapel filled with a requiem born of sorrow. The sound drifted down marble aisles and spilled into the churchyard beyond. Tombstones glistened with dew as notes slipped between, and them like pale ghosts. A hush fell on sleeping earth and roused something ancient. The melody unwound time and memory. It bent over graves like a black-robed spectre and coaxed the dead to stir. Those foolish enough to linger heard more than music. They heard breath stirring beneath broken headstones. They felt cold fingers brush their cheeks. The wind carried distant wails that matched the piano's final hollow note. For generations, the Brighton family guarded their secret in whispered warnings. Parish records note the first midnight recital in 1872. A letter from Reverend Lowry described cloaked shapes rising from fresh graves and gathering around the chapel's stone steps. He wrote of bones clicking in time with the piano. One account speaks of a grieving mother who crept into the graveyard and saw her child's coffin lid lift. The child's hand reached out, pale as moonlight, before slipping back into the earth. Merchants closed their shops early. Children slept with doors locked and shutters rattled against unspoken terrors. Even the local constable refused to patrol after midnight. Travelers who slept in the chapel's pews woke to phantom lullabies. Old groundskeepers swore they glimpsed a procession of shrouded forms drifting beneath the yew trees. Bright lanterns bobbed among broken monuments, though no living hands held them. The family claimed these visions proved that their ritual eased restless spirits. They told villagers the music bridged two worlds, but no one dared stay to test the theory. Fear kept them at bay, and rumor became a barrier as solid as stone. Why did the Brightons cling to this midnight requiem? A dusty journal uncovered in the manor's attic offers a clue. The entry, dated 1887, is scrawled in shaky ink. Our debt is owed to those we wronged. Each chord is payment for sins buried in blood. That same journal holds sketches of skeletal figures feeding from a trough of spilled wine and bread. Neighbours recalled a mass grave on the edge of Brighton land, men and women found buried alive to protect a smuggling ring. The funeral home was a front for darker trades. Orphaned souls were sold into bondage beyond the sea. The requiem, it seems, was a contract bound in melody. The music summoned victims' spirits to witness penance. Each note paid for a life taken. Each silence waited for a new soul to fall. Scholars who studied the journal noted references to an old song called The Crimson Dirge, lost to time except for these fragments. They say the melody's key change at the final verse mirrored a ritual found in forbidden rites. With each performance, Brighton heirs were bound deeper to the chapel's dark heart. The heir believed that stopping the music would unleash a curse more dreadful than any phantom, and so the family sacrificed their peace, playing through tears and torment. In recent years, historians and paranormal teams have braved that chapel. High-sensitivity mics recorded faint whispers between the piano's last chords. EVP experts claim they heard voices pleading for rest. Infrared cameras caught fleeting silhouettes drifting up the aisle as though guided by invisible hands. A medium brought tarot cards and incense into the nave. She fell silent at the third note and whispered, "They remember." She described a circle of victims bound by sorrow and rage. She said the music trapped them in a loop of pain. Scientists tested the chapel's acoustics and found an unnatural resonance at 440 Hz. That frequency aligned with a funeral rite once practiced in secret sects. Local legends insist that the piano lid moves on its own, rising to reveal a bloodstain across the wood. They claim the last heir engraved a warning in Latin, "In tenebris carmen vivit." In darkness, the song lives. Whether warning or invocation, it covers the keys like a silent oath. Yet no living heir remains to play the requiem. The instrument sits poised beneath the curtained gallery, and the chapel door stand, as ready to swing open when the clock strikes 12. All this leads us back to the empty chapel at the stroke of midnight. Imagine standing just inside the door as the air chills and the wood underfoot hums. You lift the piano lid. You press the first key. Will the notes offer solace or summon shadows? Will the cloaked figures emerge to weep or to vengeance? Each Sunday carries a choice: play on and bind the dead, or forsake the ritual and unleash a storm of grief and fury. The Brighton Requiem is more than melody. It is a debt that cannot be erased. It is a promise carved into the earth with each grave opened and each coffin sealed, and it is a reminder that some sins never sleep. What do you think this midnight requiem truly unleashed? If you're brave, subscribe to uncover more buried horrors. A weary clerk trembled as he pried loose a rotten board behind the embalming room's peeling wallpaper. The air reeked of formaldehyde and aged cedar, thick enough to choke. His lantern's flame shivered against rusted nails. Behind that wall lay a leather-bound ledger, its cover crusted with dust and old blood. Every page crackled beneath his fingers. He turned to the first entry. Inside, he found 37 names, none of them the recently interred. These were customers who had completed services, their final rites unrecorded in burial logs. No dates, no addresses, only signatures looping in red ink. Each entry ended with a single word: satisfied. No one dared ask what satisfaction meant. The clerk did, and paid the price. Night after night he pored over the ledger, tracing each name to empty plots and unmarked graves. He discovered that some entries dated back decades, long before the Brightons had acquired their funeral home. He found whispers of bodies shipped across state lines, of coffins fitted with iron locks and secret compartments. Each revelation made his lay and turn gutter. His heart slammed like a coffin lid. When the clerk vanished, villagers blamed the desertion of Brighton's rivals. They said he ran from scandal, but his ledger remained behind the wall, waiting. Paranormal investigators who searched the embalming room felt unseen hands brush their backs. They found smear marks on the ledger's spine, as if something had tried to flip its pages. A single drop of fresh blood dotted the word satisfied in the final entry. Local historians dug into probate records and uncovered a cryptic code sprinkled through Brighton invoices. A dozen surnames matched the ledger. A hidden ledger buried their fate in plain sight. One line of marginalia, scrawled in the clerk's trembling hand, read, "Full service requires full payment." Newspapers from the era hinted at a Brighton specialty, an unspoken package deal that left no trace and silenced every mourner. A forensic team tested the ledger's ink and found it contained rare compounds used in embalming fluid. The pages bore faint traces of kerosene, suggesting the ledger was burned and recopied over a century. Ultrasonic imaging revealed ghostly smudges, sketches of coffins, keys hidden beneath wig stands, and a hastily drawn map of an underground vault beneath the chapel. Some believed that vault held the unspeakable toll of Brighton's full service. Tonight, the ledger sits behind the embalming room wall, its secrets sealed by splintered wood and silent vows. It bears witness to deals struck in midnight parlours, to grieving families who paid more than they understood. The Brighton name still looms over the town, where empty hearses roll past shuttered windows. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh in the vents, feels like an accusation. The ledger demands its debt be paid in blood, in silence, in vanished souls. What code lies buried in those crimson entries, and who truly completed Brighton's services? If you dare to see the answer, you may find that some books should never be opened. Will you be the one to decode the ledger's final secret and expose the Brighton family's darkest bargain? If you have a theory, share it below. If you're brave enough, will you subscribe to uncover the next forbidden truth? At dawn, the chapel lies empty and still. Moonlight fades behind stained glass that paints the marble floor in crimson shards. A hush of dust motes drifts through the vaulted arches. The cleaning team swept the aisles and rang the bell at sunrise. Then they saw the footprints, faint and wet against the gleaming stone. They led from the altar, directly to the locked door of the sacristy. No keys fit that lock. No one could open it from inside or out. The prints ended in a neat circle of despair. Brown earth on white marble like spilled sin, meteoric in its precision. Local legends whispered that storm after storm washed the floors, yet each morning the muddy trail returned, cleaners scrubbed with vinegar and holy water. Priests anointed the threshold and prayed for absolution. Still the footprints reappeared, one solitary confession in motion. What unforgivable sin could demand this penance? The chapel's secrets lay in echoes. Wind raced down the nave at odd hours. Candles guttered without explanation. Choir robes fluttered though no choir sang. Parishioners felt eyes upon them in the pews. A visiting bishop reported a chill in the sacristy. His boots tracked new traces on the floor. He barred the door and locked it tight. The next morning he found his lock undone. The footprints resumed their silent procession, like a penitent soul forced to reenact a path. Some said a once-beloved monk wandered the corridors. He had vanished a century before. They found his cassock draped over the altar, the hem still damp with fresh dew. Records noted his misdeeds in faded ink. Confessions lost to mean, "Oh, time." Yet his guilt seemed to pulse in the stone. A historian traced the footprint shape. It matched the pattern on a grave marker outside. That marker bore the monk's name, carved by a tremulous hand. Beneath it lay an empty coffin, no body, no remains, just silent forgiveness unearned. An artist captured the footprints in charcoal, his sketch warped into elongated toes, as if the walker stretched in agony. Investigators found no soil at the temple gates. The earth there lay pure and dry. Only the chapel bore this stain. Whispered calls of "forgive me" echoed at midnight. A confessional left open in the gloom. Inside, only echoes answered. Some spotted a hooded figure kneeling at the altar, no face beneath the cowl. Boots stained like sacrilege. A soft sigh of contrition, then silence. The sacristy door slammed, keys rattled in pockets, yet the door remained locked. Footsteps receded into emptiness. In every storm, the water failed to wash them away. Each footprint survived a torrent of rainfall, a covenant written in mud. In 1832, a storm unearthed bones beneath the sacristy floor, skeleton fragments woven with remnants of prison garb. Church records noted an outbreak of plague that year. Officials claimed they buried victims outside consecrated ground, but the bones remained inside. A bishop's journal warned of unatoned deaths. He ordered masses for the lost souls, yet those prayers found no peace. The footprints resumed after the bishop departed. Apparitions of a cloaked mourner roamed the aisles, his cold breath on the back of the neck. Parishioners whispered of a voice calling their names. No living lips in sight. A confession scrawled on stained parchment. "I failed you all," it read. No signature beneath the tremor of guilt. Priests locked the chapel gates at 5 p.m., gaunt shadows pressed against the glass. Lanterns inside died without oil, no fuel vanished from the storeroom. Yet the lights went out. A single lantern flickered in the sacristy. Star, standing alone in the dark. The footprints led to it. A child's sock lay crumpled at the threshold, hand-embroidered in lace and grime. No missing children. Records show none ever entered that chapel. A cold trickle of dread in every spine, the chalk outline of a small foot in chalk, drawn by trembling hands. The sacristy door shuddered. A whisper escaped the cracks. Each investigation ended in frustration. Experts called it a blessing of the soil. Others saw it as a curse. A confession unmade. At dawn, a lone nun prayed. She knelt by the altar, head bowed. Tears wet her habit. She traced the footprints with trembling fingers, felt a pulse in the stone, a heartbeat unbound. The next day, she vanished, her habit left behind. Fresh footprints circled her name, written in sand swept from the courtyard, a final plea for mercy. "Forgive me," it read, and the chapel door slammed. Some nights distant bells told their return. No ringer pulled the rope, only the wind and unseen steps. A hymn, half-remembered, drifts through the gloom. It fades before its final note. The chapel's footprint remains, a path of unanswered confessions. If you believe the walls can speak, listen. At precisely 3 a.m. on the equinox, the chapel bell tolled once, though its rope had frayed years ago. Town watchmen swear they saw red stains on the clapper, fresh as a corpse's wound. A single knell pulsed through empty streets, then vanished into silence. No bell ringer in sight, no gathering at the foot of the tower. Only dread left behind. Tonight we scale the bell tower to uncover its secrets. We climb a spiraling iron stair that groans underfoot. Each step echoes in the shaft like a heartbeat. The air grows colder with every rung. At the top, the belfry looms, a cavern of stone and metal. Moonlight filters through cracked louvres, painting the massive bell in silver. We press our palms against its cold bulwarks, lungs, and feel a tremor, as if it still carries the weight of long-forgotten sins. A town elder remembers standing at the fountain 2 nights past equinox. He held a lantern high when the bell tolled. He heard no rope snap. He felt no hand pull. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once. He followed the echo to the tower door. He found the bells swinging on an unseen wind. He fell to his knees and swore never to return. A gravedigger tells of crimson smeared across the clapper's face. He held a lantern close enough to scorch his eyebrows. The red glowed fresh. Not rust, not paint. Blood. He pressed a rag to it. The stain seeped through like a living thing. He fled the chamber before dawn. He refused burial duties for a week. Church records note the bell's rope was removed when it began to fray over 5 generations ago. Blacksmiths declared it irreparable and left the bell silent. Yet on equinox nights, the machinery revives itself. Wood and iron creak without hands to guide them. A single toll rings out. Warning or invitation, it remains unclear which. Local legend claims the bell summons lost souls to confession. Others whisper it delivers a death sentence to the guilty. None dare stay to test the theory. Its single knell cuts through the dark more cleanly than any blade. It rings for the living and the dead. It rings for those who bear blood on their hands or guilt in their hearts. We photograph the clapper. By daylight the bronze looks unblemished. On film the crimson returns. Analysts debate exposure and pigment. No chemical test explains its living hue. Solvent and acid only spread the stain, like words carved in flesh. As dawn waits 2 hours away, we set cameras and microphones to capture the equinox toll. We circle the belfry in hushed anticipation. The tower's stone walls hold us like a tomb. Every breath tastes of cold metal and silence. At 3 a.m. a single strike reverberates. The bell swings itself. The clapper lands with the force of a verdict. The stain appears for a heartbeat, then drifts back into bronze. The bell falls still. We descend into the empty streets, our blood pounding in our ears. Brighton's bell returns to its sleeping vigil until the next equinox. We leave with questions where answers should be. We wonder if the bell chooses when to speak, or if something else does. Night fell on the Brighton funeral home like a closing eyelid. Inside the grand parlour, the matriarch sat alone at her mahogany table, candlelight flickering across her lined face. She paused mid-correspondence, pen hovering over heavy parchment. A breath rattled in the silence, and her hand traced a single motion in dark ink. "Forgive us." The words stood naked on the page, stained by the tremor of her own surrender. Hours later, the entire Brighton clan vanished into the fog. Doors once opened with a turn of the key now stood locked from the inside. Curtains swayed though no breeze stirred. Chairs remained pulled from tables. Inkwells lay upturned. No footprints led away. No lanterns glowed in the mist beyond the shuttered windows. It was as if they had dissolved into grey air, leaving only the echo of that final plea. We begin our reconstruction at twilight, when the family gathered for supper in the oak-panelled dining room. The table groaned under the weight of heirloom silver and porcelain plates. Wine was poured, and for a fleeting moment, laughter rose like steam. But something in the matriarch's eyes darkened as she tasted the vintage. Her fork paused above a heaped serving of roast. She turned and stared at her eldest son, the best of them, and simply nodded. No words passed, but he understood. He drained his glass in one firm gulp and set it down with a clink that rattled the chandelier. The youngest daughter shivered, clutching her shawl, and whispered a question that came out as a sob. "The patron." Mayash offered a forced smile, his knuckles whitening on the arm of his chair. The loaded glance they exchanged was the blade that cut through pretense. They rose, abandoned their feast, and filed through corridors lined with mourning portraits, blank eyes that watched their final procession. In the drawing room, the matriarch retrieved her journal, worn leather binding creased with tears. At her side, a brass clock ticked away seconds until midnight. She opened to a fresh page and wrote with a flourish that betrayed her resolve. "Forgive us." Then she closed the book, pressed it to her heart, and let it fall to the floor. The silence that followed was deeper than any grave. Outside, the fog pressed against the leaded glass in waves. Inside, footsteps echoed on polished floorboards. One by one, they crossed the threshold into the grand foyer, leaving behind a whisper of silk and despair. They lit no lamps. Their forms vanished into mist that curled around their ankles like cold fingers. When dawn came, the funeral home door stood barred. Neighbours assumed the Brightons were still mourning, but when the caretaker arrived, he found only the matriarch's final note. Candle drips traced blood like rivulets down the table leg. The oak door would not budge from within. Panicked calls summoned constables. They battered the door until wood splintered and hinges groaned. Inside, they discovered the long dining table set for guests who never came. Chairs stood empty. The matriarch's pen lay by the fallen journal. But the family was gone. No trail led into the graveyard beyond. No carriage tracks marred the gravel drive. Only fog and footprints that melted as they followed the stone steps back to the house. Investigators scoured the grounds at sunrise. They found silent rooms, locked closets, and a single window thrown wide to the night air. A black shawl snagged on the sill. A single glove lay on the lawn. And on the threshold, the final scrawl on the parlour wall, "Forgive us." Rumours spread of a curse that stalked the Brighton line, a pact sealed in blood. Some whispered they marched into salvation, guided by the matriarch's suffering. Others claimed they were drawn to one last atrocity, led by unseen forces demanding payment for sins long buried. Inquests concluded no evidence of foul play, yet no one claimed to see their departure. Their absence became legend. The empty house stood as monument to unspoken horrors. We sift through witness diaries, estate ledgers, and the matriarch's own journals to piece together those final hours. Every ink blot, every locked door, every drift of fog may hold the key to their fate. We listen for footsteps in empty halls. We search for the tremor in the matriarch's hand that spelled out her own confession. We ask whether forgiveness can free a soul, or if the price is a legacy lost to mist and memory. What do you believe happened during the Brighton family's final act? Decades have passed, yet Brighton's funeral home looms at the edge of town like a tombstone for the living. Its windows are shuttered, stained black with years of unanswered grief. On still nights, passers-by swear they hear muffled sobs echoing through locked corridors. The bell in its steeple lies silent, its rope rotted away. Yet some claim a faint toll drifts on the wind when the moon is full. Inside, the air hangs heavy with dust and the faint scent of incense long since spent. Floorboards creak under unseen footsteps. Velvet drapes, once crimson, have faded to the color of dried blood. In the undertaker's ledger, entries trail off in ink that seems to shimmer in candlelight, as if the words themselves demand remembrance. Portraits of the Brighton clan line the walls, eyes shadowed and hollow, faces twisted in smiles that never warm. Town records list no graves in the cemetery beside the chapel, yet fresh wreaths appear on All Saints' Day, placed by hands no living soul has seen. Children whisper of pale figures gliding behind the glass, and travelers hasten past the ornate iron gates, convinced that gazing too long invites a sorrow that never lets you go. The funeral home stands as both monument and mausoleum, a place where vengeance and blood have taken root in every beam and brick. Its legacy is a silent grave, a riddle carved into wood and stone, echoing with the Brighton family's final question. Were they punished, or did their feud transcend death itself? What is your theory about Brighton's silent grave? Subscribe if you dare to uncover more forbidden histories.